friends. I'm your host, Ralph Newell, and today's guest is Dr. Carrie Kisker. She is president of the Kisker Education Consulting in Los Angeles and a director of the Center for the Study of Community Colleges. Welcome, Dr. Kisker.
Thank you. Pleasure to be
Yeah.
here.
So let's start with your journey. Where are you from, and what did you dream of doing when you were growing up?
Ooh, great question. I grew up in Colorado, in Fort Collins, Colorado, and
Okay.
I think my major dream through all of high school and into college was to play. I was a soccer goalkeeper, and I really wanted to play for the U.S.
Mm.
women's national team. I did not accomplish that goal. But I played college soccer and loved it. And I lost my position my junior year to a woman named Kristen Luckenbill, who came in and did manage to play for the U.S. women's national team. So that is this close to achieving that particular goal as I got. But as they tend to do, goals shift over time, and I took one education class. Well, I took many more than one, but I took one
Mhm.
particular education class probably my sophomore year in college and just fell in love with the concepts and ideas that we were chewing on and being asked to think about. And I ended up minoring in education
Mhm.
at Dartmouth. And I went into the corporate sector for a little while after college. I thought maybe I'd go to law school. I tried that out for a bit, tried out some other things. And at the end of the day, realized that nothing really got my blood pumping or felt as fulfilling as all the thinking and writing I had done about education back in college. So I applied to graduate school. I went to UCLA for my master's and my doctorate, and was lucky enough to study under and later work with the great Arthur Cohen,
Mm.
who many of you may know is sort of the granddaddy of community college studies in
Yeah.
America, and ended up just being, a great love of mine, but also a wonderful advisor and colleague and friend.
Okay. And I want to go back to soccer for a second. So, but I thought I read, I think it was on your LinkedIn page, that you're a tennis addict.
Well, yes, because I have a big enough ego that if I kept playing soccer now, I would just be a very weak shadow of my former self. So I have to take on a new challenge where I can continue to get better and better. So that's where tennis is for me these days.
Who's your favorite male and female tennis player?
Oh gosh, I don't know, but I've been watching Coco Gauff lately.
Okay.
Alcaraz had an amazing match yesterday, I think, at the French Open. But honestly, I love it all. It's so inspirational, right? I go out there and think I could do that and
Yeah.
watch them. I can't, but I try.
So then, playing tennis, then what are your thoughts about pickleball?
I'm in. I'm in
Yeah.
for pickle. Honestly, I think anything that
Okay.
gets people out there having fun, being in the fresh air, being a little bit of competitive. Um, and it's not going to replace tennis in my life, but I think it's
Mhm.
fantastic.
All right, good deal. Um, but you're talking about Dr. Cohen being a mentor, so 'cause I was going to ask you, what inspired you to concentrate on community colleges?
Well, that's a great question, and the answer is the same for me. It's the great Art Cohen. I went
Hmm.
into I hadn't necessarily considered studying community colleges, and frankly, I hadn't really thought much about them. I had an incredibly privileged college experience. I went to Dartmouth. I went straight after high school. I was a recruited athlete.
Hmm.
And I had good grades in high school, but I hadn't been challenged. And so it was a bit of a rude awakening for me when I arrived at college, having written no more than a 5 paragraph essay ever in my life and had a 20-page term paper due that first fall. And I didn't know how to approach it. And I was smart enough to know to ask for help and got a lot of it. And I, eventually learned to write, having a couple books under my belt now. I think I finally figured out that skill, but I was very aware while in college of the privilege of attending an institution that was so focused on undergraduate teaching and learning and had the resources and ability to support me and every other student who needed something else, right, in order to achieve
Hmm.
their full potential. So that was what I knew, and I knew enough to know that that is not what everybody gets, right? So
Right.
when I applied, I also sort of know my limitations, and I just felt like our K-12 system had so many problems. I didn't even know where to start with that, and so by default, I started applying to higher education graduate programs. And when I went to go interview at UCLA, I met with a number of fantastic faculty, and Art Cohen was the last one to interview me. And if you recall him, Newell, he was 50 years and a couple
Hmm.
months older than I was.
Hmm.
And so he was not a young man at that point. He was not far away from going emeritus. And he was very tall and sort of gruff with big, huge black glasses and
Hmm.
intimidating. And I sat down in his office and he said, "Well, why do you want to study higher education?" And I gave a heartfelt but like, probably very superficial answer
Hmm. Hmm.
about wanting to make sure that everybody had the same access to and were equitably served by institutions across America that I had been, so fortunate to have at Dartmouth. And he said, "So you're interested in access and equity?" And I said, "Yep, that's about right." And he said, "Well, if you're really interested in those ideas, then you have
Hmm.
to study community colleges because that's where those things happen or happen first." And that
Right.
stuck with me. And I've done all kinds of projects with other kinds of institutions. I've done scholarship in other institutions as well. But in my heart, I remain committed to the ideas of access and equitable support for all students, regardless of what background you're coming from and what assets you're bringing with you. And I do think that without the community colleges, we don't have, a hope in hell of providing those things to our students.
I was reading a little bit from your book, The American Community College. So, now admittedly, I didn't read it all, but what is the big takeaway that you want readers to take from that?
That's a good question. Because I was a co-author on the sixth edition, I was able to put my stamp a little bit on the sixth edition of that book.
Hmm.
But both Art Cohen and Florence Brower had passed away before I wrote the seventh edition. So I wrestled with, to what extent do I continue their legacy in this
Hmm.
book that has been used for 40 years, right, in
Right.
classrooms? And how much of my own beliefs and values should I should I put into this? And I ultimately came to the conclusion that Art and Florence would want me to make it mine and to make it written from the perspective of someone whose entire graduate school and professional life has been in the 21st century, and
Hmm.
reflect that. So, the biggest change in the seventh edition of the book, I think, and it ripples throughout all the chapters, is my strong belief that the social role of the community college is to provide social mobility for marginalized and vulnerable groups and
Right.
not just marginalized and vulnerable students, which is what Art Cohen had firmly believed, that we cannot be responsible for group mobility or group progress, he thought, because that was asking too much, and we can only focus on the individuals in front of them. And I think, I understand where he's coming from, but at the end of the day, in the absence, my opinion is, in the absence of public policy and the desire for public policy to work at cross purposes, to really providing all people in America with a fair shake at the American
Right.
dream, then we have to have institutions that recognize how certain groups have been structurally barred from enacting their own American dream over the years and actively work to provide avenues of mobility for them. And to me, that is what I believe the social role of the community college is, to do that
Hmm.
for marginalized groups, to do that for communities that may feel marginalized or left behind or no longer as strong and vibrant as they used to be. And so that attitude, I guess, or that values stance permeates a lot of what changed in the seventh edition of that book. And is backed by, all the new scholarship and programs and practices that have been implemented on our campuses too. I try to put as much of that in there as possible.
Now, what year did it come out?
It came out in August of 23, so it's still
Okay.
relatively new. Yeah.
Relatively new, yes, I would definitely agree with that. But since it's come out, I think about some of the things that we were doing 2 years ago that are like been turned on its head. So,
Hmm.
with the current climate, political climate that we have, what challenges do you see community colleges facing right
Oh
now?
boy. What challenges aren't there to face right now? Yeah, I think you make a good point, Ralph, that the tone of the book, at least as I intended, was really optimistic because we were
Hmm.
coming out of this great racial reckoning after
Right.
George Floyd's murder, right? And there was a lot of conscious thought about the fact that we have promoted some groups over others or held some groups back throughout our history.
Hmm.
And so it's very optimistic in the way it looks at and forward thinking that this is sort of assuming that this will always continue, which I know I'm not the only one to have really made that false assumption, I guess. I think if I wrote the book today, the tone would be a little bit darker. Ralph, I know you were there at the talk I gave at the NISOD conference, but I do think that there has been a systematic and very intentional effort over many years to tear down the pillars that hold up our system of higher education. And in particular, an attempt to do that so that higher education is no longer this bulwark that protects our democracy, right? So
Right.
we're attacking the institutions that uphold the values and the beliefs that our country was founded on, to make it easier for those in power to take further advantage of their positions and what money is out there to be made. Fortunately for community colleges, many of us are flying under the radar a little bit, right? We're not
Hmm.
the ones
Hmm.
being attacked in the Washington Post daily, in the New York Times, on Truth Social, and so forth. And yet, as I said in that talk and have said many times as well, I think community colleges and other broadly accessible institutions of higher education will feel far more deleterious effects over time because of these attacks. Because
Hmm.
we serve, as the name of this podcast, we serve those in the margins. We serve
Right.
those who are really likely to be dissuaded from attending higher education at
Hmm.
all, and who have been told over and over again that higher education is not for them, or this particular type of institution is not for them.
Right.
So I do think that while most of the vitriol in today's climate is aimed at institutions other than community colleges, the blowback is going to be the worst at our types of institutions.
Did hear you speak at NISOT, and you had a lot to say about the attacks on DEI. And one of the things that caught my ear, you said to the audience, was they had to open their eyes to the way that the system is being attacked. Can you explain exactly what you meant as far as, what do you think people are blind to, and then what should the next steps be
I'm not sure
after
we're
they open their
blind to that
eyes?
much anymore. I think we had been in many ways blind
Hmm.
to. I talked in that speech and others about the sort of five fundamental pillars that I believe undergird all
Hmm.
of American higher education. And many of them have been attacked for years. The first pillar I talk about is institutional autonomy, which we sort of guarantee through accreditation, through the self governance process, right?
Hmm.
And accreditation has been attacked for years and years. I think I asked the audience at one point for an example of how institutional autonomy has been attacked, and some guy in the front row just yelled "Florida,"
Right,
which
right,
made
right.
me laugh.
He did.
Um, but but I think what he meant there, at least what I took away from it, was that Florida has been sort of at the forefront of trying to dismantle the system of self governance and self accreditation, because if it is not under our control, it becomes under somebody else's control and therefore can be manipulated more. So I don't think we're so blind anymore. I think
Hmm.
if we were blind on January 19th, we are no longer blind. I think
Right.
people see it for what it is now. I think people are connecting the dots between attacking higher education and promoting an autocratic system of governance. So then the question becomes, what do we do about it? Right.
Right.
And that is the really tricky one because so many of us live and work in states where fighting back or resisting or standing up for things that we believe in, like, for example, DEI programs and policies, is dangerous, right? Or has been
Mhm.
deemed unlawful. So that's the question, and I put forth in that speech three, sort of primary areas where I think we can all work
Mhm.
together to do this. The first is through connection. Basically said we can't stand alone in this. If, it's sort of that iconic photograph of the student at Tiananmen Square standing in front of all the tanks,
Mhm.
and that's a very powerful image, but that guy alone probably couldn't stop the tanks, right? But if there are 1,000 community colleges and all of our faculties working together and standing in front of the metaphorical tanks, we will be more likely to succeed in preserving what we find valuable. The second area is resistance, and I told the audience that the best advice I can give about resistance is from the little tiny book on tyranny by Timothy Snyder. And the first rule in that book is don't obey in advance. And yet we see so many examples of people and
Mhm.
institutions engaging in anticipatory obedience these days, so as not to draw the ire of those in
Mhm.
power right now. But I think that does nothing but really weaken our collective ability to fight for what we stand in over time. And then the third area of action that I put forward is innovation. That we have a tendency to just circle the wagons when we're under attack and try to protect
Mhm.
whatever currently exists, and that's understandable. I think we all react in that way to some extent. But I have been really encouraging people to also try to see the opportunity in the moment,
Mhm.
and recognize that just because we really believe strongly in what we're doing doesn't mean that we're always doing it perfectly or that we don't make mistakes and can't do it better. So trying to, and it's really difficult, right? It's really, really
Right, right.
hard in this environment, but trying to look for new ways to accomplish our objectives and to stand up for our values and our systems that maybe do it better, or at a minimum do it as well, but don't
Mhm.
allow certain words and phrases and ideas to be weaponized us against us in the same ways.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a good point. So how do you think educators and administrators can, still advocate for DEI in a way that resonates to people with so many, I guess, divergent political perspectives?
Yeah. So I it's a really good question. And I will start by saying I don't have the answers. I'm not sure any of
Mhm.
us have the
Right.
answer right now. I worked for many years with a bunch of people at community colleges and other institutions through the Kettering
Mhm.
Foundation around the idea and the opportunity to engage in deliberative dialogue and deliberative practices. And the
Mhm.
whole idea, so you would get a bunch of people who have different views, different perspectives, different life experiences in a room, and you'd sit in a circle and you'd put a really political issue out there like gun control or reproductive rights, and you would be asked to talk about this together. And through the deliberative process, we would all be asked to focus on not what our beliefs on how we should have this law or that law or the government should do this or that, but what are the values that lead us to those beliefs. And what
Mhm.
we found time after time is that when we got people talking about values, so things as fundamental as we should all feel comfortable that our children will be safe as they walk to school or when
Right.
they're at school. We should all be safe that nobody is going to force me to do something with my body that I don't feel is right or that I don't choose.
Mhm.
We should all be able to take care of our families, our elders, our young ones. We should feel safe in our own homes. And what we found is that people from across the political spectrum can agree on the same values and disagree on how we should create laws and policies to enact those. And that was fine. We should be having these difficult conversations where we disagree. But if we can come back to where we find agreement on the values, then we open up the opportunity to find new ways of accomplishing those. I do a lot of work around design thinking, and it goes back to stakeholder needs. If we can focus on stakeholder needs and we have a solution that meets one stakeholder's set of needs but not another's, it's not a real lasting solution. So we have to go back to the drawing board. And I believe very strongly in the ideas of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and so
Mhm.
forth, but I am not convinced that we have already identified the best ways of accomplishing those objectives, simply
Right.
because we've not identified the best ways to do anything yet, as far as I'm concerned,
Mhm.
right? Like
Mhm.
the amount of ego involved for us to say that it cannot be improved upon. And so that's all that's sort of where I come down is that um, we should stand up for these values of diversity. We certainly don't want homogeneity. We don't want inequity, and we don't want exclusion. So yeah, I think Pete Buttigieg said
Right.
that really, like, it's very hard to stand up for the opposite of those things, but we may have to find new ways of talking about what we're doing in ways that people can understand and agree with the values behind it.
Yeah. I think we talk a lot about what the politicians can do, faculty administrators. What about students and parents and just people in the community? Any ideas?
Yeah, it's a great question. Dr. George Boggs was a guest on our Spotlight on Community Colleges
Mm,
podcast a couple of months ago. And I stole this line from him because I think it's so brilliant. But he said students have to be our secret weapon in our collective resistance against what's happening right now in higher
mhm.
education. Most politicians are
Right,
not going to look a student or a former student in the eye and say, I don't care about your experience, you're wrong. I think most people will listen and understand, and it will, in most cases, tug at a heartstring. So, if we
mhm,
can send groups of our current and former students to Washington, to state capitals, to talk with legislators and other policymakers, and just ask them to talk about their experiences. What did a
mhm,
community college or another institution of higher education do for them? What would their life have been like had there not been an institution like the one they attended, or program like Trio or Umoja or Puente or any of these that take low income and otherwise marginalized students and show them that there is a way to accomplish their dreams, right? And so,
mhm.
if we can hear from students why those programs are so important and made such a difference in their lives, I think people will be able to hear them without their
Right,
preconceived notion of like these programs are promoting one group over another. They're just literally trying to even the playing field, even a tiny bit, doesn't even do it perfectly, right? But
right.
just doing what we can to give students who have not been granted a leg up, a tiny leg up in this situation. Students are really key to this. And I also think it's a fabulous opportunity for community college or all college students, right? To
Mhm.
begin to develop the civic agency and skills to
Yeah.
go in and say, this was so powerful for me, and I want to make sure I can help preserve it for other students like me.
One example of that, and I just saw a headline today that I guess, and I hate that I'm even saying this. What do they call that thing? That big, beautiful bill or whatever
Hmm.
that's going through Congress. That sort of in a small print there is there was going to eliminate the Pell Grant for
Yeah. Part-time
not for
Pell.
community colleges,
Yeah.
any part-time students.
Yeah.
That could be devastating for actually any student,
Absolutely.
but more so community colleges. So many working.
76%, I think, of community colleges attend on a part-time basis, something like that, mid
Right.
70s. So
Exactly.
yeah, part-time Pell goes away. Potentially, three-quarters of our students are no longer able to afford attending community colleges, which are, relatively inexpensive in most states
Mhm.
already. But that's the reality of the situation if this big, beautiful bundle
Yeah.
of bill goes through.
I mean, I don't know what the percentage is off the top of my head either for four-year institutions, but it's large.
It's
you know,
large.
people
Yeah.
that go part-time. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you maybe have an idea of like what is the end goal with this? I mean, I really don't understand it.
I honestly think, Ralph, it goes down to incapacitating our institutions of higher education because when people are taught how to think critically and for
Hmm.
themselves, it threatens an autocratic rule, right?
Hmm.
When you
Hmm.
have people who say, I don't agree with that, and here's why, and here's some evidence behind it, and this is my experience, and it's not what you're saying. Then it threatens this sort of mob mentality,
Hmm.
and I think at the end of the day, it comes down to that fundamentally higher education represents a threat to autocracy, and it should, in my opinion.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so we, as the fourth estate, has been attacked and torn down, the media and other institutions that help protect. I mean, the Washington Post motto is democracy dies in darkness. And I think that that is very, very clear. We've seen it in other countries and we're starting to see it now. When we can't trust the news media, how do we know? How can we protect democracy? And it's no different for higher education. I also think that there is an attempt, which I never thought it would get as far as it has, although it's always been there to some extent, to basically see any program or institution that attempts to enable social mobility for certain groups. And again, I
Hmm.
said this is the whole mission and social role of the community college. But there are people who see that as a threat to, a racialized caste system that for however many hundred years has benefited a certain group of people over all others, and higher education threatens to even the playing field. And Those who tend to believe in that this is a zero-sum game feel very threatened by that.
And I was looking at your pillars. I wrote them down the other day
Mhm.
at your talk. The institutional autonomy. I'll just say them all for the audience.
Mhm.
Academic freedom. You said second, third. You said freedom of expression and promotion of free speech. Access and equitable support for the underserved community, and the commitment to the public good. I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying the pillars are at all, but I thought about it. I said that's a very contemporary view of it to me. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Mhm.
Of So I'm like, okay, why do we have colleges? How did they get started? They were started, to educate the religious leaders, and then
Yep.
eventually the children of the wealthy. And then it got for the greater good, if you will, of society. So if all these pillars crumble, I mean, what do you think we're going to be left with?
Do you remember that movie, A Day Without a Mexican? Did you ever see that movie when it basically I've thought
I
about that in terms of like what is a country without the community college system? What does that look like?
Exactly, but no, I
Um,
think that's an excellent analogy.
Yeah, right? Well, let's take each pillar by itself. If we
Hmm.
see institutional autonomy crumble, then we see the government telling institutions what they can and cannot do and what students should and shouldn't learn.
Right.
Along with that goes academic freedom, right? Like currently, professors are given the protections to study and teach what they believe. As
Hmm.
individuals, professors do not speak on behalf of their institutions. Academic freedom doesn't protect that. That's why it doesn't protect administrators. These are individual faculty member who ought to be freed up in order to push the boundaries of science and knowledge, and also to push our students to think critically and for themselves. Have to be able to say provocative things sometimes, right? And have to be able to ask their students and provide classroom environments where students can do the same things.
Hmm.
If that crumbles, again, we see the government telling us what we can teach and how we have to teach it, and what is worth learning, right?
Yeah.
And, regardless of what political party any of us identify with, I don't think we want the other one or ones telling us what to
Hmm.
think and how to think it, right?
Right.
So it's not saying that we should all believe one thing. I think, think about the person you disagree with the most. If they were in power, would you want them to be able to say, this is what you can teach and this is what you can't learn?
Hmm.
Same thing with free speech, freedom of expression, promotion of critical thought. And this is a really tricky one for college campuses, especially in the past couple of years, but before that as well, because sometimes allowing freedom of speech means that feelings get hurt, right? And we have
Right.
to allow speech, I firmly believe sometimes that hurts feelings. Now, we have to draw the line when people, students in particular, feel threatened or attacked or are threatened or attacked.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's a line that needs to be drawn and everyone needs to be protected. And yet, we seem to be swinging back and forth and we allow too much and then we don't allow enough. And unfortunately, our institutions, as they're trying to figure all these things out in real time, and making mistakes along the way, as would be expected,
Right.
are that's being weaponized against the whole system. Access and equity, as you point out, was certainly not a foundational value of American higher
Hmm.
education, but it has become one. And I would say largely because of the community colleges and their mission. But if that crumbles, then we go back to a system when we're just educating the most elite of families with the most money who can afford to pay 60,000, 70, $80,000 a year for their kid to college without any help. And anybody who can't afford that doesn't go.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking at. And then the final pillar, commitment to the public good. And, this one has been around in different ways
Yeah.
since the establishment, in particular, of land grant institutions across the
Right.
United States, but community colleges in particular. But also, I would argue the research mission in America
Hmm.
and across the world is really aligned for the public good, right?
Absolutely.
Professors are not doing research in most cases to make themselves the big bucks. They're doing research to push the boundaries of science and knowledge and to benefit humanity. And so all kinds of things start to crumble when we have colleges that aren't looking out for their local communities as they are often doing. When we have programs being cut because somebody in charge doesn't see the value of them, but farmers and ranchers have been relying on these extension missions of land grant institutions, for example, for hundreds of years. when we have programs that support students who have not had as much opportunity in their younger years to come to college and be successful, when we are not giving students the skills to go out and work in their communities and better the communities and stand up for what they believe, and the type of world that they would like to see for themselves and their children. Then we ended up with an exclusive, homogenous, not particularly equitable set of
Right.
institutions, and I don't think that benefits any of us.
And not as educators. I'm like, okay, if all these people aren't educated, what are we going to do as a society? I mean, isn't we going to revert to being an agrarian society or something?
Yeah, right.
But it's funny you talked about that research component of needing to research, and my oldest daughter is a researcher, and she's going to be working on her PhD, and she's like studying rats of all things, and I'm like, I still don't get it, but I get it. But she's looking at things about how the rats studying that, but she's also an economist. But she's
Mhm.
looking at the how rats destroy the economy in regards
Hmm.
to um, overpopulating farms, destroying the crops.
Oh,
The plagues and diseases that they bring into the cities, and then
yeah.
you got the marginalized people getting sick from this, and then they don't
Yep.
have health care. And so you just think it's just a rat or a mouse, but they have implications. And so if you don't have people researching these kind of things, I mean, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse.
Absolutely. It's that type of basic research where there's not
Mhm.
necessarily an immediate product or pharmaceutical or something that's going to come out of it, but
Right.
those types of studies that actually help us understand the world we live in and
Mhm.
make decisions about how to protect it, right? I think
Right.
that's
Yeah.
great. Kudos to your daughter. That's fantastic.
Yeah. I have to always smile.
It's a proud
I'm
papa.
thinking about the money side of it, but no, it's good. I'm proud of her for what she's doing. You talked about there were three things that folks need to have: connection,
Mhm.
resistance, and innovation.
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm kind of stuck on resistance
Mhm.
right now as the mode that people need to be in.
Mhm.
How does that resistance look for our senior leadership today, you think, in colleges?
I think it really depends on where those senior leaders are. There are a bunch of former senior leaders that are working with people like Dr. George Boggs and Pan
Mhm.
America and other organizations to really be the mouthpieces of the resistance, right? Because they can't be attacked so easily. They are no longer representing an institution that can be punished.
Right.
So I know that George feels very strongly about the role that he and some of his fellow presidents emeritus, for example, can play
Mhm.
right now. I think senior leaders in states or in institutions where they are supported and standing up and saying, we are not going to comply with this, executive order to dismantle all diversity, equity, inclusion programming and
Mhm.
ideas on our campus. We are going to sign on to in concert with our other college presidents and the American Council on Education or AAC&U or faculty groups or any of these other organizations that are sort of organizing a collective resistance, sign on to that, ask how they can how they can help, how their institution can be involved. I think they can do regardless of well, I'll back up. I think that there are a lot of senior leaders right now
Mhm.
who cannot be that vocal and out in support of our missions and our institutions right now because they are not in states where they're protected in doing so, or they don't have boards that will protect them in doing so. And that's okay. There are lots that those senior leaders can do on campus to cultivate an environment where everybody feels safe, even though this stuff is going on. And to say, like, we are not going to stop enacting our mission as an institution and our mission as part of higher education in general. We may have to
Mhm.
find new ways of doing that, but we are going to try to communicate our values and get public support for, again, these underlying values. We want students to be safe on campus. We do not want to discourage anyone from attending college. We want to do everything we can to help them afford it and be successful in it. And it's really hard to argue with those underlying values. We can disagree on the policies that we're going to use to get there and the wording and the whatever else. But I think that there's a lot that senior leaders can do to message to those in their community, primarily students, but also faculty and staff and community members, that this is a
Mhm.
safe place and we believe in our mission and we are going to continue to do it. And we may have to find new ways of doing some things, but we
Right.
are not going to waver from what we believe in.
What would you say to you the most common misconception that people have about DEI that if we could address that, the political situation could be a little better?
I think, and I'm going to guess on this now because it is
Hmm.
not particularly an opinion that I share, but
Okay.
I do think that what I can distill from the arguments against DEI is there is a fear that certain groups are being promoted over others and getting resources that should have maybe been given to others or distributed equally.
Hmm.
I think honestly, it comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding or distrust of the difference between equal and equitable, right? An
Hmm.
equal distribution of financial allocations means everybody gets the same amount. But if I don't need any and you need a lot of it, it doesn't help either of us to get the same amount. And I do believe that there's a great swath of this country who has not necessarily been exposed to these ideas in ways that doesn't make them sound dumb or behind
Hmm.
or less than. I think that unfortunately we have not always been the best communicators of some of the more progressive values that we as educators often hold. And I don't mean progressive politically, I mean in terms of supporting students from all backgrounds. And I think that is a group of people who just feel like they feel looked down on because they don't get it. And
Hmm.
we've not been very good at communicating the values behind this historically. And those of us in academia, none of these, ideas of DEI or critical race theory or anything else are particularly new. I mean, we were talking about this in graduate school 25 years ago, and
Right.
people were talking about it a lot before that. So when I first learned about some of these things, critical race theory in particular. But now it's hit the public consciousness and they're really complex ideas, right? A lot of times. And yet we
Hmm.
don't take the time to allow people to sort of come to an understanding and comfort level with them over time. And I think the bottom line is that people tend to see resources in particular, whether they're education resources or monetary resources, a zero sum. That if I get more resources than you do, then it's unfair. When in reality, when we're talking about education, I firmly believe that if the students who need more resources and more attention get them, then we can all participate in a richer education environment and learn from each other. And it's the same argument with diversity, too. We learn about the world and in much more nuanced and interesting ways when we're learning with and alongside people who are different fundamentally than we are, right? And
Absolutely.
if we
Yeah.
all come from the same communities and we all look the same and we have the same experiences in life, we're not exposed to anything new. So we don't do a great job of talking about how educational environments can be richer because of these things, that it benefits those students who maybe don't need as many resources, whether it's human resources or financial resources or what have you.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. It's funny when you were talking about people were talking about this a long time ago,
Hmm.
back when you were in graduate school and even before then. I watch old movies, old TV shows, and it's interesting. And maybe just because my radar is up for it right now, if you go back and you watch some old TV, they talk about these issues. Sometimes it's in a comical way, sometimes it's serious, but to your point, people have been talking about this for years, and it seems
Hmm.
like it all has just funneled up, to like a volcano now. It's just
It
exploding.
has, but it's gotten like the risks of talking about it openly feels so much higher now. I don't know if you feel
Right.
the same
No,
thing,
I,
right?
I
Like
would
we're
agree.
so afraid to say the wrong thing. And I told you at the start of this conversation, I was just looking at some of the feedback from my talk at NISA, and it was largely positive, but there were a few comments in there. People did not like how political I got at times, and people disagreed with what I had to say at times. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I'm sorry they were disappointed in the talk, but I think we're so afraid to upset people, or we're so
Hmm.
inexperienced in having conversations where we can disagree politely and with respect, and we're seeking to listen and learn as much as speak, that it becomes really dangerous, or it feels really dangerous to doing that. And like you said, we didn't always used to feel this way. And if we could try to work each of us in our everyday lives to start
Hmm.
having some of these conversations that feel really dangerous and threatening, and give ourselves a little bit of grace, knowing that we're not going to say everything perfectly and that we
Yeah.
might not always make people happy, but we're trying to talk to each other. I think that would go
Yeah.
a long way.
Absolutely. It's funny you say that. I'm going back to comments from NISOD. I don't know if you remember in the beginning, I don't even remember what it was for, but you asked people to stand up or sit down based upon different things. And the table that was to the left of us, whatever it was, I can't even remember now. 95% of the room stood up, but this one guy, he did not stand. I just kind of looked at him, but he had his arms crossed, and he caught my eye. So from a body language standpoint, I kind of looked at him, watched him the rest of the time he was speaking. He probably was one of those negative people.
Probably.
Guys. He was not feeling it. So at
Yeah.
least that's what his look was. So anyway,
Well, I'm sure there were people in there, and that's okay, right?
yeah, oh,
That's
yeah,
okay.
absolutely. Last couple of questions. What's on tap for you this summer?
Well, the most important thing I'm doing this summer is doing a massive road trip with my 17-year-old daughter to try to look
Okay.
at a bunch of colleges and figure out where she sees herself. So that's the most exciting thing, really, that we're doing.
Mhm.
I'm working right now. I'm looking at some of data, the Center for the Study of Community Colleges, which I run with a board of fantastic directors, collaborated with the Association of Community College Trustees, largest empirical study and maybe the largest study ever of community college trustees. We have over 2,000 responses. And so we are putting out a huge report in the fall in collaboration with ACCT, looking at community college trustees today and who they are and what they're thinking about and how they're supporting their institutions and so forth. So I'm spending a lot of time working on that this summer. And I probably will be spending a lot of time giving talks like I did at NISOD and elsewhere,
Okay.
and writing an article here or there. But I'm also looking forward to having a little bit of family time too.
And what about for yourself? What's your guilty pleasure for the summer?
Guilty pleasure. Well, we started this conversation. I spend a lot of time taking out all my energy and aggression on the tennis court. So I've got
Okay.
a lot of that planned. We're going to visit some family. My parents are in Colorado. We'll spend a week with them in June, and I look forward to just having a little bit of a lighter schedule over the summer. I am very aware with a 14-year-old and 17-year-old that I have a limited number of days left with all four of us in the home. So I'm trying to enjoy those while I still have them.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay, Dr. Kisker, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
You're welcome.